Coming up on Theater Talk.
That's not part of the dynamic. You're not doing a play in order to get to Broadway. You're doing a play with the playwright in the room, a living playwright. My favorite thing to do, because then you've got somebody to say, what did you mean by this? You know, a dead playwright, you can't ask that question of.
Theater Talk is made possible in part by the CUNY TV Foundation. From New York City, this is Theater Talk. I'm producer Susan Haskins.
And I'm Michael Riedel of the New York Post.
So, Michael, today we want to celebrate the 30th anniversary of one of the finest not-for-profits in New York City.
Yes, one of the leading off-Broadway theaters is the Vineyard. It has given us such shows as Three Tall Women, Avenue Q, The Wonderful Lions, and one of our favorite musicals of the past 10 years, The Scottsboro Boys.
Yes, absolutely.
One of the great actresses in New York City, on Broadway and off-Broadway, who was absolutely terrific in The Lions, is my dear friend Linda Lavin, who is closely associated with the Vineyard. Welcome back to Theater Talk, Linda. And welcome the man who is at the helm of the Vineyard Theatre, who's given us these wonderful plays, the fine producer and artistic director, Mr. Douglas Aibel. Welcome to Theater Talk.
Thank you very much.
And he's also brought with him another one of our favorite actors, Colman Domingo, who starred in the Scottsboro Boys and who's done his acclaimed one-man show, Body and Soul, at the Vineyard. Welcome, Colman.
And Colman has got the first shot in Lincoln.
Yeah.
You have an amazing role in Lincoln.
Thank you.
I was just so delighted to see you there. All right, we go on.
We'll go on now. Right? Thank you.
So 30 years, Doug, the Vineyard Theatre. When did you started it? Were you?
No, it was founded by Barbara Zinn Krieger in the early 80s.
Right.
And she had a concept, a vision of a small multi-art chamber theater, and took over a small, very small, modest performance space on East 26th Street. And the original concept was a home for a variety of arts: theater, music, chamber music, jazz, opera, visual art. It was quite ambitious. Yeah. And I met Barbara about a year into the birth of the Vineyard. I was, really just out of college. I should say I was just out of elementary school, and began to work with her. And through the early years of the theater program, and particularly plays and musicals, became dominant. And as things progressed, we had a wonderful opportunity, which Barbara was able to convince the Zeckendorf organization when they were building the Zeckendorf Towers.
Big real estate
right.
family in the city.
There was a potential building going up in Union Square, and was able to orchestrate brilliantly for the Vineyard to move into a new home in the basement of the Zeckendorf Tower.
Where you
are still? Yeah.
Where we are still.
And why was it called the Vineyard? What was?
Well, there are a lot of questions about that. A lot of, we always try to think in terms of what Vineyard really means about cultivating artists and seeing things grow and develop, which is so much what we're about. The truth is that I believe a friend of Barbara's, right before the theater was incorporated, had a dream about a vineyard. And it was literally somebody had a dream about a vineyard, and the next day, when incorporation time came, Vineyard Theatre was born.
That's kind of great.
So it was alchemy. It was very, very,
that's right.
It was a dream image.
When did you take over? When did you become the artistic? Had you been Barbara's assistant?
No,
like
no.
the little gopher at the Vineyard? Was that
we were working together in the early days. I was her associate, and then after a few seasons, I became artistic director for the theater program. There were other artistic directors in other programs. And then when we made the move to 15th Street, Barbara became the executive director and board chair, and then I became the artistic director. And then in recent years, I've been very fortunate to have a fabulous team, two cohorts in crime. Sarah Stern is now my co-artistic director, and Jen Garvey-Blackwell is our executive producer. So I have this fantastic family that I collaborate with, and we've been together a long time.
I remember going to the 26th Street Theater and seeing Polly Penn's Goblin's Market, which was this wonderful chamber musical, and wasn't that the first show that sort of brought attention?
I think so. It was interesting. After about 2 seasons, and really we were just starting out, we had the good fortune, I guess, of 2 music theater productions getting a lot of acclaim and transferring to commercial runs. One was Polly Penn's Goblin Market, and the other was Lady Day at Emerson's Bar and Grill.
Oh, yeah, I remember
Lynette
that.
McKee, which has become a staple. It's one of the most widely produced shows to this day. It gets hundreds of productions around the country and internationally. So I think at that point everybody looked around and said, who are these people? Where did they come from? And that really launched us.
on the map.
Now, I'm curious, Linda and Colman, you guys have both worked at a number of the institutional theaters in and around New York. Do they all have a different kind of character? Do you have a different feel when you're, let's say, at Lincoln Center or MTC than when you're at the Vineyard?
I think so, yeah. Has a total different energy, right? I mean, like the public theater has it feels differently than it does than the Vineyard. I mean, they all have their own personalities, it seems.
Yeah.
I think that the team there is also representative of the personality of the theater. I think we're talking about this from the artistic meeting. Jen Governor Blackwell and Sarah Stern invited us to come to a meeting with a lot of artists that associate with the Vineyard, and we had this conversation about theaters and their personalities, and we're trying to define what is the personality of the Vineyard Theater. And you know,
and how would you define it?
I would define the Vineyard Theater as I think is probably one of the more innovative, risk-taking, intelligent, but you know, in a quieter way. You know, they're not
yeah, not a lot of fanfare. Doug,
not
a
lot of fanfare. I think there are other theaters where it is a bit showier.
Yeah. Now, Linda, when you're at Lincoln Center, is it like, I always think of Lincoln Center as stately and grand and the...
Well, you know, it really depends. If you work at Lincoln Center on street level or underground,
yeah.
That's a different experience. If you are rehearsing in the theater, in that room where we did Other Desert Cities underground, that's an experience that's different from the Vineyard where we worked. First of all, it's closer to home for me, Lincoln Center.
Right, so you
that's
can walk.
number one. So I can walk.
That's a good
I was
thing.
the only person who got home during the blizzard 2 years ago. Everybody else was stuck on the subway. Stockard was in a cab for several days. I was at home walking the dog in the blizzard. So Lincoln Center is convenient for me and the people there, Andre and Bernie. And I go way back with them. But I haven't worked at the public since I did Shakespeare in the Park in another century.
But you worked under Joe Papp.
And that was under Joe Papp.
Talk about an immense personality.
Talk about an immense... We were doing Comedy of Errors. John Pasquin was directing, and I was playing the chief courtesan, and we were doing it as an Italian movie. So we were coached in Italian dialects. And we talk like this in Shakespeare, we're talking like this, good morning, senor. And all of a sudden, we did the first preview, and a Mercedes-Benz drives through the park, and Joe Papp comes out and says, "Cut the damn accent." We're like, but that's all we have. We're dressed like characters out of Rafiki, you know. We look like a 30s movie and shot in Rome. And, well, that was the end of that. So that's my experience with the public. My experience with the Vineyard, because of this man and the people that he surrounds himself with, has been gentle, supportive, loving, excited. He brings with himself every day this desire to do great work. And so the great writers come in the door, and with them wonderful actors and directors, all committed to exploring something that has such potential and such possibility because of the talent involved and the commitment and the passion that comes through the door.
I think the spirit of the work, hopefully, is very adventurous. I mean, as anyone who is a regular theater goer at the Vineyard knows, you expect the unexpected. We take on what I call impossible projects sometimes. I actually think about my high school days when I would go to Joe Papp's productions, because I used to love in that era, in the 70s, that you'd see these big, nervy, bold, crazy productions by emerging writers, often very flawed, very messy, and that was something I really admired about the work that he did, and it's something I aspired to do when I had my own theater.
Well,
in fact, I just remembered I did work for Joe when I did John Guare's plays. They were done at the public.
Of course.
I've forgotten about those. Talking about risk, talk about taking chances.
And Guare is a writer that I grew up admiring, Albee, Sean OCasey. I mean, writers who not only had a very distinctive voice and profile, but who really had this ability to tackle bold issues,
Exactly.
deal with both the personal and political, juggle comedy and tragedy on a dime in a
That's what Nikki Silver
5
does,
minutes.
who's
And that's
the
the
co-host.
psychological
I think
and
that's
sexual.
what
exactly.
Paula Vogel did in our production of How We Learned
Oh
to
my
Drive.
goodness, How I
Yeah,
Learned to
that was a
Drive.
wonderful
Exactly.
play.
Edward Albee did in Three Tall Women, and
How many Pulitzers have come out of the Vineyard
we're
Theatre?
very fortunate that two have, actually, the aforementioned
Yes.
Three Tall Women and How I Learned to Drive. And we've also, as I said, had a very equal focus on musical theater, and we've had the pleasure of working on Title of Show, Avenue Q, and
Well, I want to ask one of the things that I thought was quite risky and is a favorite musical of Susan and mine, Scottsboro Boys, which of course you were in. And I really felt that, you know, Susan Stroman at that time had, she'd done Young Frankenstein and she'd taken quite a few knocks for that.
Yeah.
And I just thought it was great to see her go to a small theater and with nothing but, you know,
Chairs.
tambourines and chairs,
Yeah.
create the South in 30?
Yeah, 1931. That
1931.
was so exciting because also no one had any idea what we were doing. We're all taking a leap of faith. This is the very first production of it, and we're getting the opportunity to do this work and to do it in a deconstructed minstrel form. We're like, so we all had to just jump on board, and the theater was on. Everyone's on board, and we're gonna take a leap. We have no idea what's going to come out of this, but we know we're just so invested. And so it was so exciting and thrilling because also we didn't have Broadway aspirations. Honestly, we were doing it for the Vineyard Theatre.
And that's an important element.
Yes.
That's not part of the dynamic. You're not doing a play in order to get to Broadway. You're
Right.
doing a play with the playwright in the room, a living playwright. My favorite thing to do, because then you've got somebody to say, what did you mean by this?
Yeah, yeah.
You know, a dead playwright, you can't ask that question of. And a great director. I mean, Mark Brokar, to have him and Nikki Silver in the room, and the lack of intrusion by the executive producer, and the warmth. And yes, I will talk about the gentleness as well as the passion to look into what is possible with material and great people in a room, and to explore as far as you can go with this. You know, to look into yourself, to explore the depth, the darkness, the danger, all of that can't happen all the time in commercial theater.
And Linda,
and then we got a Broadway production out of it,
Yeah.
which blows you away because that's not what the intention was. That's not why we did it.
Right.
You do it for $1.25, and you have to take the subway to work.
and you left. You left Lincoln Center's other desert cities that was going to transfer to Broadway.
Yeah.
And you walked away from that to go down to the Vineyard and do Nikki Silver's The Lions.
Sure.
I'm dying, Rita.
Yeah, I know, but try to be positive.
And I always thought that was such a remarkable,
Why did you do that?
remarkably courageous choice.
Well, it was an easy choice. The newness. I had done other desert cities. I told you, 17 years. I'm out of there. You know, I'm somebody who has had one adventure and is ready for the next one.
Right.
So I was certainly looking forward to a more satisfying, more compelling character with Nikki's play.
Yeah.
Speaking of this span of 30 years, one of the beautiful things being in it for the long haul is you establish these long-range relationships with artists, and there's no time limit on them. The backstory on how Scottsboro got started was we had first worked with Kander and Ebb and Susan Stroman and Tom Thompson on a revival of Flora the Red Menace at our old theater in 1987. And lo and behold, 25 years later, my phone rings, and that was Susan Stroman's first New York choreographic effort. And she called me out of the blue and said, you know, we're working on this new piece. We're not sure what to do with it. Can we send it to you? And I read it and I loved it. And here it was over 2 decades later, and we all began working together. And so it's a really beautiful thing, I think, when you can establish these relationships and you never know where they're quite going to go, and ultimately
it's true.
they come full circle.
And I'll piggyback on that, just like with ours. It's like, you know, even when Scottsboro Boys, all of a sudden Doug sent me a script and said, hey, I think you'd be great for this. And here I am still thinking, I don't do musicals after Passing Strange. I was like, oh no, this isn't for me. I really can't do this. And he said, no, take a look at it again. It's really, it requires an actor who can sing. And he convinced me to be a part of the workshop, and I really was like, I don't.
Why didn't you want to do musicals after?
Well, because first of all, I would be terrified to work with. I was at first terrified to work with Susan Stroman and John Kander. I felt like the stakes are even higher. I'm like, oh my gosh, I really have to. These are the masters of the form, and I was terrified. But I believe that the relationships that Doug and I we start to form, he actually knew more of what I can do than I knew myself. Yeah. And so
we should say Doug is a very
nice.
successful casting director.
Yeah, he is.
He really is.
It's a very important element
Yeah.
too. Exactly, and that he knows something about us that maybe we don't know.
Well, it's a funny thing. I
That's
work in
nice.
film as a casting director. It's sort of my other hat that I wear. And as Colman put it, like, we actually got to know each other because I read with actors when I audition them for film, and we'd read together as scene partners. You really get to know somebody when you're acting a scene with them. And you learn something about them that you wouldn't know otherwise.
Now, let me ask you, Doug.
Can I just say something?
What?
I
have a point I want to push here.
All right, I just want, before time's up, we want to be sure to talk about the development of Colman's one-man show.
Yeah, we will.
Thank you.
She's always jumping on lines.
I
was
You're
interested.
such a star.
If you don't keep quiet, I'm going back to my trailer.
See what's happening.
I want to pick up on
Hollywood
something that
over there.
Linda said and get a sense, Doug, of your philosophy about being an artistic director. She said that you leave the creative people alone. One hears stories of Joe Papp letting people run for a certain point and then showing up, as you said, and saying, cut the accents, or with that championship season when everyone was fighting at each other, and he walked in and he said, well, boys, you've got something there if you don't bleep it up, and that was it. How much rein do you give them? And are there times, though, when you have to come in and take control of a situation because it goes off the rails?
Well, each project is its own baby, and it's very important to not be doctrinaire about this and look at the needs of a particular artist, a particular production. I and my co-artist director, Sarah Stern, are very hands-on, but I try not to do it with a heavy hand. So I'm very involved, like in the development of Scottsboro Boys. We were at the table a lot, working together. I just try to be more discreet in terms of the rehearsal process, especially if it's a director that I really trust, to really let the actors in the company do their work. There's nothing worse for a cast a week and a half into a run of a show to have the producers sitting there taking notes in a rehearsal room when they're not ready to be seen. So you just have to be smart about when you're present. But I believe in being very hands-on, and yet being hands-on in there's that word, gentle way, and really taking each project and looking carefully at what it requires and hoping that everybody's on the right track. And somehow when a production is meant to work, it does. I find there's a certain chemistry that's magical that sometimes shows that seem to be not quite gelling do suddenly during the tech period.
But I think the cool thing is what they do at the Vineyard, from Jen Garvey-Blackwell to Sarah Stern, et cetera, they'll just ask a series of questions. The questions that they may have in part of the process. I've never heard you guys actually really give, even our what we call our note sessions, you ask me a lot of really intelligent questions that would get me thinking.
Like what kind of questions?
Like, I have a question about that mother-son relationship, that thread there. I just have questions about that. And is it the strongest use? Are we following that line through? And so for me as a playwright, I'm able to actually just, I can figure that out. I'm like, there's something missing there. There's a reason why Doug's asking this question, or Sarah or Jen, and then I'm able to really attack it in a stronger way. Instead of someone saying, that's terrible, or you don't need that anymore, or I don't think that does you any good. They'll just ask some really smart questions to keep you going on your way.
It's thoughtful.
Yes, it's very thoughtful.
Have you ever experienced the heavy hand of someone, Linda, in your years?
I was just remembering when Doug talked about the producers who sit and take notes, in a room, not even in a theater, but in a room where all the lights are on, and you're working, and all you can see is a person with a clipboard or a legal pad. And it's always about you, because of course it's always about you or me. But the thing about what I've heard over and over again, and I think what we're talking about here is trust. That of course there are conditions and situations where the executive producer and his team have comments and things to share with the writer and the creative team. And so those things get decided, and moments get cut, and moments get added, and scenes get changed, and all that work takes place, but it doesn't get intruded to in the moment that the actor is trying to figure something out. There's that thoughtfulness, and there's what really the passion about giving the writer and the director and the actors and the designers and all the creative people the space to do what they were hired to do, which gives you the desire to go to work every day and show what you got.
Take the subway.
Exactly. Take the subway if necessary. You have to. There's no other way. But get there on time. But because it's far. But no, it took me 12 minutes to get from my house to the Vineyard. I loved it. It's no big deal. But is that John Kander and Nikki Silver and many others are calling the Vineyard their home. I hear it over and over again, that the creative people who have been invited to do work there, and I as an actor have been honored there, have been invited to be part of that family, and I think of it as a place where I'll always be welcome, and I hear it over and over again. This is my home, the creative people say, that we are welcome there, that we are encouraged to bring material there, to say, I'd like to try something here. And that's very special in New York, in a big city like New York, to be able to feel that way about a theater and a production company. It's very special.
Now, Doug, do you have the desire, as some of the other nonprofit theaters have done, to move uptown, to go to Broadway, to compete for Tony Awards, to have your stake on Broadway, as The Roundabout has done and as Manhattan Theater Club has done?
I think we've loved being where we are. I think something about Union Square, it's at the crossroads of downtown and uptown, and I like to think in a way that the programming of the Vineyard has that spirit too. I'm going to sound like that. Country, a little bit country, a little bit rock and roll, a little bit downtown, a little bit uptown. But it's a home for all kinds of artists, you know, emerging playwrights, established artists like John Kander, experimental writers, and writers who work more traditionally. And
so being in that whole Tony sweepstakes, many people get
we've
caught up
been
in.
very fortunate. Several productions have moved uptown or have transferred commercially, but you can't have your eye on the prize. And I think our work is too adventurous and eccentric to dally in that. I really like to just do the best work that I can do, and if it has a future life, fantastic. A number of our productions, I'll think of one like Nikki Silver's play Pterodactyls, which was one of the first things we did, and another play by Craig Lucas called The Dying Gaul, which didn't transfer commercially but have had a profound and major life outside of New York, internationally, sometimes in film, and have really had an impact on theater artists and audiences everywhere. So I think the goal is to do the best work that we can and hope that it gets out there.
And we're almost out of time, Doug, but I want to mention, first, you revived Edward Albee's career with Three Tall Women, and also that you gave Colman the opportunity to do a wonderful show on his own.
Yeah, Boy and His Soul.
Yes. How was that generated?
Well, Colman was very industrious, and he kept inviting me to, he had written a draft of this one-man show, and we didn't know each other that well at the time. And he kept emailing me and calling me saying, I'm doing a presentation at Joe's Pub, and will you come? And he called me like 35 times. The day of the reading, it was a blizzard in New York. It was an ice storm, and I was
He had a cold.
high fever. I was incredibly sick.
Linda was walking her dog near Lincoln.
And Colman said, please, please, please come. And I said, okay, I'm coming. And I showed up drenched. I didn't have a seat because it was packed. I stood in the back. And 5 minutes into it, you know, you just have that feeling of, this is a voice, this is a writer, this is an artist. I have to produce. I have to do it. And we just said, let's go, let's do it.
Yeah, and I've been through many conversations with artistic directors and people who I thought would try to produce it. And so we actually were sitting in a meeting, and we were having a conversation about A Boy and a Soul. And then at the end of it, I said, so this meeting is because, he said, oh, I want to produce it. I was like, oh, okay, great. Because I was just getting, I thought I was just going to get noted to death.
I just before we go, Doug, I do want to touch on this. I think one of the really most important contributions that the Vineyards made to American dramatic literature is finding Three Tall Women. We have to remember Edward Albee at that point, his career was as cold as it can be. I mean, he had flops on Broadway. I think The Man Who Had Three Arms was a play that Frank Rich called a rant in 3 acts or something like that. How did Three Tall Women come to you, and what made you think I'll take a chance on someone whose career basically had been finished, dismissed?
I had had a friendship with a wonderful agent, the late Esther Sherman, who was Edward Albee's agent at the time, and I was a big fan of his. I loved all of his plays, and I think I approached her actually about doing originally in our small theater a revival of one of his plays, and she took note of the fact that I was a fan of his, which I am, and just called me one day and said, this play is being was done recently out of town, and would you read it? And I was like, would I read it? Of course. And again, from the first page, I knew it was a really major play, a great play, and I was so grateful and to do it. And it was the way that I felt when Paula Vogel first sent me How I Learned to Drive as well. You just know in your heart that something important is being said by this artist, and it demands to be heard. You just got to do it.
We got to wrap it up. Linda Lavin, Colman, Domingo, Doug Aibel from the Vineyard Theatre. Thank you for being our guests. What do you have coming up now this
We're
season?
about to open a wonderful new play called The North Pool by Rajiv Joseph. And it opens next week, actually. And March 18th, the Vineyard's 30th anniversary gala, which will be hosted by Mr. Domingo, I believe.
Oh, yes, I guess so, yeah.
And Linda, who came to New York, you're about to leave for California, right? 'Cause you're gonna do a series.
I won't be able to go to the gala. I'm sorry about that. But I have to say, this has been lovely to be here and be part of this, and to be able to say thank you to Doug in public for inviting me to be part of the Vineyard family. To be able to start a new play, and it's been a wonderful 30 years for him, and the beginning for me 2 years ago, and I hope I'll have
We've got
30
to do
years
at least
with you.
10 more shows.
Okay.
And Colman, what's up next for you?
Next, after the gala, I go off to Hong Kong to shoot an action thriller about exchanging body parts in the future.
I don't put that.
And that's my life. But also, yes.
High comedy.
High comedy, very highbrow. But I also want to say that it really, I feel like I'm a new member of the family of the Vineyard Theatre, and it really is a great place to always be, and with surrounded by artists like this.
Look who we get to meet.
Thank you, guys.
All right.
you.
Thanks a lot for being a
Thank
guest
you all.
on Theater Talk.
Thanks.
Our thanks to the Friends of Theater Talk for their significant contribution to this production. Theater Talk is made possible in part by the Frederick Lowe Foundation, the Eleanor Naylor Dana Charitable Trust, the Corey and Bob Donnelly Charitable Fund, the Noel Coward Foundation, Carrie J. Fries, the Dorothy Strelson Foundation, the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, and the New York State Council on the Arts, a state agency.
We welcome your questions or comments for Theater Talk. Thank you and good night.